Hi, and welcome to the fourth video in our PowerShell and ElasticSearch tutorial series. In the last video, we saw how to create our mapping or our index. Today, we're going to be looking at how to insert items into that mapping or index. And in the next video, we're actually going to be taking a look at another method of inserting, but inserting a lot of items at once. Today, we are going to be doing a for each loop and looping and inserting items as we go through it. So for this example, we are actually going to be doing a log of our services that are running on our computer. This is an example that we've used plenty of times in other examples and other tutorial videos. So I feel like that is just a very common thing that we've worked on. So it should be fairly easy to understand by now. If you haven't seen those other videos, I'm going to be explaining everything anyways. So if you haven't seen other tutorials, you should be okay by watching this one. Just make sure that if you are watching this tutorial, to at least have followed the 3 previous videos where we install Elasticsearch, we connect to it through PowerShell, and we also create the mapping because there are some things like this code here that we've actually already seen from previous videos, and this is where we're going to be starting with our base. Once we get to the part where we're creating our module, we won't have this anymore. We're going to be creating a full module for Elasticsearch, but this is really just to learn how to use PowerShell with Elasticsearch first to get those basics down. So without further ado, let's actually go ahead and let's get started. So the first thing that we know is our mapping that we've created. We had 4 fields, or actually 5 fields. So we had our timestamp field, we had server name, application name, type, and message. So we have 5 fields for each item that we want to put in there. So what I actually like to start off with is I like to start off with the common ones that will be the same for all of them. And for us, that's going to be the timestamp, the server name, and the application name. The timestamp I like to keep the same. I don't like to put the timestamp at the exact second that the item goes in because I like using the timestamp in Kibana later to know exactly we can group all the script executions at once. The timestamp is more to designate when the script executed and collected that information. Then the application name is going to be our script name, which for us is going to be a fictitious name. And then our server name, which we are going to be grabbing the computer name. So let's actually go ahead and let's start off here by actually creating our timestamp. So we're going to create a variable called timestamp. I'm just going to put the t as lowercase here. And we are going to actually make this a universal timestamp. So the reason why we are not going to store this in our own time zone, so typically when you do a get date, you get your own time zone, which we can actually do right here. So if we actually look at this, we just run the get date. It shows me December 31st, 2022, 11:46 a.m. That's because I'm in the Eastern time zone. The thing that happens with this is if you want to use Kibana later on, Kibana uses universal time and will actually translate the time back to your time zone in the web interface. And a lot of other cloud logging systems, like especially if you use Graph API with Microsoft, everything is stored in universal time. So what we actually want to do when we store items in Elasticsearch is to always store them using universal time. So the easiest way to actually get our timestamp in a format that will work for Elasticsearch is to do a set of parentheses, put get date in there, and then we're going to do a dash date, and then we are going to do a variable wrapper again in here, and then in there we're going to do get date. And after the parentheses, the first closing parentheses here, we are going to do a dot to universal time, open and close parentheses. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do a dash format. And then we're going to do a set of double quotes. And we're going to do 4 Y's in lowercase, dash 2 uppercase M's, dash 2 lowercase d's, an uppercase T. So that first part, the Y's, the M's, and the D's, that is going to be year, month, and day. Then we're going to put T to designate time. And we're going to put 2 capital H's, a colon, 2 lowercase m's, and then a colon, 2 lowercase s's. And if we actually go ahead and we run this now, we are going to see that we get 2022-12-31-T16-4805, which that would translate to, again, December 31st, 2022, 4:48:5. And that's because Eastern time zone is 5 hours less than Universal time. So if it's 11:48 here, plus 5 hours, it is 4 o'clock and 48, or 4:48 p.m. So we have our timestamp. Now the other thing that we need is our server name, and that is very easy to get. We've seen this in other videos here, but we can actually reference our environment variables. So $nth, and then we could put a colon and then generate computer name, and that will grab the computer name of the computer that is running that script. So if this is your script server, it will grab that name. You don't actually have to manually type that. So if you ever move your scripts from one server to another, you actually don't have to go in and change the server name that you've hard coded in there. And then we are going to create our application name variable. And this is going to be, we're just going to pick a name here. I'm going to put YouTube service script. And this is just really to tell you what is running. Typically, you would probably put your script name in here, or maybe your scheduled task name in here. Something that you would know what that script is, so you could easily go find it afterwards if there's something that's going wrong, depending on what type of log you're putting in here, and you can see what exactly is going on. So that the other thing that we need is, since we are going to be storing our services, now that we have all of the default ones, because the rest is type and message, which that is actually going to depend on the service itself. Our message is going to depend on the service name and the status, and the type is also going to depend on the service or status. So what I actually want to do for this script is I want to grab all the services that are set to an automatic start and see whether or not they are running or not. If they are stopped, I want to let the system know that there's an error. So in my ElasticSearch, I'm going to put the type error and then just put a little message saying this service is stopped and it should be running. So let's first off by grabbing our services here. So we're going to create a variable called services, and we are going to do a get service. And then what we're going to do is we are going to actually go ahead and pipe that to a where-object start type -eq for equals. And we are wanting to look up anything that is automatic. And we can actually see that here. And we're going to get all of our automatic services. Now, what I actually like to do as well, since I am not running this as administrator mode, my error action here, I'm going to put this to silently continue. Now, I'm going to actually break this down a little bit more for you guys as well, is how I got to this. So what I would typically do here to know what property I need to know that is equal to automatic is I would do a get service and then pipe that to a select star. Now, the proper way would be select -object, but all you're doing is just trying to really see the different properties. A select star works just fine. So here we'll actually see all the objects, and we can actually see here start type is automatic, and status, that's what we're going to be looking at afterwards. Then we have display name. So there's a lot of different things here, but we can actually see, we can also see the startup type. So you can see if it's automatic delayed start, or in our case, we're just going to be looking at start type. So once we have our start type set here and we get all the services that are set to automatic, what we actually want to go ahead and do now is loop through each of these services and see what the status is to make sure that it's running or not. So for that, we're going to do a for each service in services, and we're going to do an open and closing curly bracket. And then in here, we're going to have a if statement. So we're going to do an if $service dot status is equal to running. Then we know that the type, because that is our other property that we have in our Elastic, the type is actually going to be set to OK. And then what we are going to do is our message is going to be, we're going to do a variable wrapper here. We're going to do a service dot. I like using the display name. It's a little bit easier to know exactly what the service is. The name can sometimes be a little cryptic if you're not used to looking at these services. Is running should be running. So that's fine. Everything is good there. And then we're going to have our else statement. And all I'm going to do is actually copy paste this type and message here. We're going to change the type to error. And we are going to say that the message is the service.displayName is stopped, should be running. So that is actually all good here. So then what we actually want to do now that we have all of our properties basically set, what we want to do is create a PowerShell object. This is the way that I'm going to be doing it, is I'm going to be creating a PowerShell object and then simply converting that object to JSON. You can actually fully write the JSON in order to insert the object as well. I just find it a little bit easier to actually create the PowerShell object and then just convert it to JSON. This also gives me the ability, if I want to do anything else in PowerShell with that object later on, it is very easy. I already have that object created. That is simply the reason why. So what we're going to do here is we are going to create an object by the name of entry here. So we're going to do $entry, and we are going to do a new object with the type name of PS custom object. Now there are a lot of different ways again to create objects. This is just the way that I do it on these videos. I just find it a little bit easier to follow along. So once we've created our entry object, we are going to add a member to the input object of entry. And then our member type is going to be a note property. And then the name is, we are going to put that as a timestamp. Now, the way that you name these properties is very, very important. Because ElasticSearch is case sensitive, the way that you created your mapping should be the way that you name these properties. So in my case, I had an uppercase first letter, and then every word afterwards was also uppercase. So timestamp, the T and S were uppercase, server name, the S and N were uppercase, application name, the A, N was uppercase, and so on. So you're going to want to make sure that you definitely follow that, because you're going to get, if you don't do that, Elastic isn't necessarily going to give you an error message, but you're going to notice that your mapping is actually going to be a little weird, because you're going to have some mappings with the proper mapping that you mapped it to. And for example, timestamp, if we actually didn't put the proper timestamp in, Elastic might not actually take our value as a time value. It might actually take it as a string or as a text value, which we do not want. So that is just some little things to look out for when you're doing these objects. So we're going to put our timestamp here, and all I'm going to do is actually I'm going to copy paste this line 5 times here, well 4 more times, so we have all of our options here. And then we're going to put server name, we are going to put application name here, type, and message. And then here we're going to do a server name and then application name. Now you might be wondering, because I just said that we need to match these names properly, but these are just variables. These are just placeholders. If you did want to make your variables match this is by all means completely okay, as long as you keep it pretty standardized. I like to always keep my PowerShell variables camel cased, which is the first letter is still lowercase, And then every new word after that is going to be in uppercase. But pretty much as long as you keep it very consistent, anything really works and should be quite readable. So now that we have all of our items put in here in our entry, let's actually just go ahead and let's look at what our entry looks like here. So if we actually run all this code, we will see our entries get created here. So let me just open this up. So here we have our timestamp, our server name, application name, type. So as you can see, everything looks very, very good here. We have our update orchestrator services running, should be running. It is set to OK. So everything looks very, very good. So the only thing left for us to do now is to actually put this entry in. Now, the way that we actually need to do this, as we've seen with our mapping, anything that we put into Elasticsearch needs to be in JSON. So the easiest way to create the body for our API entry here is going to be doing a body and once again a string literal, which we've seen as well. And then in here, we are actually just going to put a variable wrapper, and we are going to do a entry here, and we are going to go ahead and we are going to pipe that to convert to JSON. And we can actually just see what this looks like right now for our one object here. So once we actually run that and we just look at body, we actually see timestamp. So everything is actually wrapped in double quotes, which is what we need for Elasticsearch, as we've seen in our previous videos. So everything looks good here. And then all we need to do is call our API to insert that item. So what we're going to do is we are going to do a variable here. We're going to call it response. As always, we always want to store our response. And we're going to do invoke REST method. We're going to do URI. And for this URI, we are going to put our URI base here, which we actually did in the last video, just to prevent us from always writing it. And then if for some reason our server changes IP addresses, we only have to change it at one place at the top here. So once we have our logs here, we're going to do another \_doc. Now this will tell it that we're storing a document. And then our method here is we are going to do a post method because we aren't specifying a ID for our document. Now there are ways that you can specify an ID. We will actually see that in a later video when we're focusing on Elasticsearch entries that we actually want to update. But for services, all we really want is always to insert a new record. This way we can see the history of the services and see if there's any maybe correlation to time of when services crash. We can actually properly see the history of them. This would be the scenario for this script here. So once we have our method, all we need to do is put in our headers here and then put in our body, which is going to be our object. And all we want to do is do the skip certificate check. And let's go ahead and let's do a response at that point. And we are going to do that convert to JSON. And that should be all good here. So let's actually run this entire code and we are going to see what happens. So as you can see, what we're getting out is actually this sequence number. And this actually tells us basically what item entry this is in our Elasticsearch index. The more times you insert items, this will go up into the thousands and thousands, as long as you keep using that same index. And it gives us the ID that it gives us for that item, gives us the version of the item, which the version is actually going to come in handy once you start updating. That'll tell you how many times that record has been updated. If the version is 1, it is still the original version. If you update it, it goes to 2. And then if you update it again, 3, and so on. So that is very handy to actually keep track of as well. And it'll give you a success or a failed, which you always want it to be successful here. Now, just to make sure that we actually have fully inserted all of our items here. Now, this is not something that you need to worry about in this video. We're going to do a whole video section. There's probably going to be 1 or 2, maybe even 3 videos on searching in Elasticsearch, because Elasticsearch searching is very, very in-depth. There's a lot of different things that you can do for it. But let's just go ahead and let's make sure that our items are in there. So let's do a response, an invoke REST method. The URI in this case is going to be, once again, the URI base and then \logs. And in this case, it's actually going to be \_search. And all we want to do here is do a question mark, size equals 1,000. If we don't do size equals 1,000 here, you don't really need to do 1,000 because we have 61 items. We could just do 61. But the default size of a return in Elasticsearch is only 10. So if you don't put that in there, you wouldn't get all your services back. And if you did a specific search for something, you might not get that back. So let's put in our method is get. Let's put in our headers. And let's do the skip certificate check. Now in this case, we are not going to do a response pipe to convert to JSON. I want to show you guys what we can actually do with this actually. So once we actually get our items back and we look at what is in response, we actually get back a PowerShell object. As we know with invoke REST method, we get back PowerShell objects. And what we can actually do, you can see how long it took in milliseconds here. So it took very, very little time to get all that back. That is one of the benefits to Elasticsearch. It is very, very quick. So if we do a .hits here, then we will see that we get 62 hits, and we actually have another hits here, which is going to be hits again. And in here, you can actually see the index that we pulled things back from, the ID of the entry, the score, which a 1 is a perfect match here, which we pulled back every item, so that doesn't really matter. And then we actually have _source. So if we actually do _source here, we can actually see all the objects that we inputted into our Elasticsearch. And then using PowerShell, you can actually then pipe this to where, let's just do a where object to keep it nice and proper here, where type is equal to error. And here's all the services that are actually in error. We get the timestamp that we ran the script. We have the message, so we know what service is actually stopped. And we can actually wrap this here and get a count. Now, of course, you can actually make this Elasticsearch mapping a whole lot better if we added other properties. If we knew that this was going to be for services, kind of just thought of that last minute, we could have added mappings like service name, type. We could have did start type, we could have did the status, and we could have really stored all the information from our service that way. But this works just fine as a general log. As I said, like you can easily use this mapping for a bunch of different scripts that you would write, and then just kind of fit your error message or message into message, and then put the type as okay, error, info, or warning based on the type of event it is. And then you would be able to then filter it based on application name, server name, and timestamp, and see all the different results that you have there from your log. So that is how you insert items into Elasticsearch. I know that that was probably quite a bit of info to take in. Our next video, we're actually going to be seeing how we could actually insert all 61 items at once. So right now we've actually executed this API 61 times to input 61 objects. There is a way that we can actually put all of our objects together, call the API once, and it will actually insert all of them at one time, which is a lot faster. And if you're dealing with thousands and thousands of items, that could save you a lot of execution time in your scripts. So be sure to stay tuned for that as well. If you guys have any comments or questions, please let me know down below in the comment section. I will do my best to get back to you guys. And if it's something that could benefit a lot of people. I will definitely be making a video on it. Please also hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. Also hit that notification bell to be notified when that next video comes out. And I will see you guys on the next video.